Those who realize the truth know that we live in a flat world with what can be described as a geocentric universe, having the sun, moon, and stars circling above it. Yet many wonder how we get long-range communication and internet if stuff like outer space does not exist, because they say there are satellites in outer space that provides this stuff. I think these images of satellites are fake and that what people imagine as satellites do not really exist. I do think there are some devices up in the sky, but I do not think they are floating in outer space, in orbit around the Earth or anywhere else. The truth is that what people imagine as satellites are actually held up by balloons that keep them flying in the air. We know stuff like high-altitude balloons exist, which include weather balloons and other types of balloons. So it makes sense that satellites are high in the sky, because these balloons are known to fly high up in the sky. There are actually images and videos of these balloons taking devices up into the sky, which I think are what people consider to be satellites. Then we can find videos of people finding crashed satellites with balloons attached to them, such as this one, taken in Brazil. Showing what these things truly are. Not in outer space, but in our local realm. Here above the Earth. I also believe there are not near as many satellites as how many they claim there are. So how do we get all this different access to stuff like phones and internets across the world if there are much less satellites than what we are told to believe? I think some of this comes from ground towers here on Earth. People might be more familiar with satellites, but for a long time we have actually had very long undersea cables or submarine cables which deliver the internet across the world to different places. They actually admit these exist, yet some people don't even know about them or don't give too much attention to them. They pay more attention to the idea of satellites. But most of our internet comes from these cables. And these cables are not small. They're at the bottom of the ocean. They go all the way across the ocean. You can even see maps like this that show where these cables go. They're actually this long. There are these very long cables that go all the way under the ocean, across continents. Some people also believe there are secret underground cables that go underground too. There's more maps we can look at like this. This shows the different parts of the Earth. They even admit where these cables go to. I think this is where our internet access and the Wi-Fi signals and the internet signals really come from. At least most of them. Some come from the balloons, but I think most come from this, the long-range internet signals. These cables can also deliver phone signals. You see, this is how they lay them. They have these huge cables like this in the boat. Then people take them off the boat and lay them underwater. Here's a demonstration. They have this boat, then it lays down this cable, and this machine underwater that puts it down across the ocean. And it becomes these huge cables that go all the way across to different continents and islands, delivering internet and phone signals. Here is an article from Newsweek saying undersea cables transport 99% of international data, meaning these undersea cables transmit most of the data of internets and telephones across the world to different continents and countries. I think the remaining 1% is transmitted by the balloon satellites, the fake ones. Well, they are real, but not what they claim they are. They're also not nearly as common as what they claim. Do you know what else does not make sense? The fact that places with less access to certain types of technology, or the poor places in the world like rural areas that do not have a lot of technology infrastructure, cannot access the internet, and that they cannot get signals for the internet or stuff like telephones unless there's like something brought there like one of the fake satellites or the balloon satellites or a new infrastructure that provides it to them. This does not make sense, because why are these poor regions with less technology? Why do they have less access to internet and telephones? Even when they bring them in, they need to still build the infrastructure. Because if satellites really existed, they should be able to provide it to them. I think it is really because they are not connected to this other system, which is what really provides this access. I personally have been in places that there is no phone signal or internet signal, way out of the city, like way out in nature. This even happens in countries with a lot of technology, in the places farther away from the cities or farther away from the technology. You lose access, which should not happen if satellites exist, like how people are made to believe. There's also Loon, which is part of Project Loon, which is made to give internet or phone signal to places that do not have it. They actually use balloons instead of satellites, like what NASA makes the fake images of satellites, but they use balloons instead to give these signals, because satellites do not exist like what they claim. Google also takes part in this, explaining how we get stuff like Google Maps, Google Earth, and other things, which is claimed to be made by satellites in outer space, but I think it is really made by these balloons and some other stuff. They might take pictures from high up in the sky, then put them together and make it look like the whole Earth with fake stuff like Google Earth. They sometimes even use blimps to bring internet access to places which cannot get it from these undersea cables, since these places are not connected to the infrastructure attached or related to these cables. Wi-Fi, the internet, phone signals, and radio really comes from a system like this. It is also claimed these satellites go through a layer of the atmosphere said to be the thermosphere, which is very hot. Therefore, it does not make sense how these satellites can still work, because if they really did go through something that hot, then they would be burned, not able to work. In addition to the towers on land that provide all this access, there are occasionally some towers on the ocean that deliver internet, phone, and radio signals, as well as maybe television. I think these are much less common than the ground ones. I don't know if these have a major effect on how all this stuff is transported with data and all that. Because I think most of it's probably done with undersea cables and stuff, but I think this could at least partially help with some stuff. The same could be true with buoys, some of which are deep out in the ocean, powered by solar or wind energy, and can deliver signals to different places by directly sending them to something else, or first sending them to other buoys, which will then send them to something else. Next, let's look at what are called high-altitude platform stations, also known as atmospheric satellites. These are, it says, is a long-endurance, high-altitude aircraft able to offer observation or communication services similar to artificial satellites. They claim these artificial satellites are in space, but these are different. They're like aircrafts that they give the signal satellites give. These have actually been used in the past, at least from as early as the 80s, maybe even before that, or it's the 50s it says down here, so possibly even before that. Though we see there are different versions of these. They can be different types of aircrafts. They can also be drones or stuff like that. Then there are the ones that are blimps or balloons that we learned about. Though there's something else I want to point out about these. There's something called a pseudolight, as you can see here. It says it's a pseudolight is a contraction of the term pseudo-satellite, used to refer to something that is not a satellite, which performs a function commonly in the domain of satellites. This is what they are claiming. Pseudolights are most often smaller transceivers that are used to create a local ground-based global positioning system, which is GPS. So these, I think, are what really make GPS, or at least help make it. We see that these are put on the ground. So these are used on the ground instead of up in the sky, but they do the same things as what they claim satellites do. But it's really a ground-based system. It even says here it's a ground-based system for GPS. Technology like this actually existed before NASA and before people claimed to make the first satellites. There's also ideas that these satellites shoot signals off the dome firmament, then come back to Earth. Or not these satellites, these dishes on the Earth. Whatever you call them, satellite dishes. Maybe that's what they call them, but either way, I think there's a hidden truth about where we get our signals from that they don't want us to know. LORAN was a form of long-range navigation developed in the 1940s, used by ships and aircrafts, and I think maybe other stuff, with ground-based towers and technology. This system was used by the military to track people's locations, showing that it was used for sinister purposes. Some suggest phone and internet signals are also sent through wires that go underground, perhaps through the secret tunnels and facilities of what are called deep underground military bases, a topic for another time. A number of sources even say these underwater submarine cables attached to underground cables. We can see here these underground cables. It says, hidden beneath the ground lies an extensive network of underground cables that stretch for millions of miles or thousands of miles in one direction, but altogether millions if you put it in different directions or count them all together. But anyways, it says, this intricate web of infrastructure forms the backbone of the digital age, enabling essential services like water supply, energy distribution, electricity, cable television, internet connectivity, and phone communication. This vast underground network, a complex system of pipelines, underground cables, and wires, is discreetly working just below the surface to support our everyday activities. In fact, some estimates suggest that this subterranean web spans an astonishing distance of over 20 million miles. Here is one map of one of these systems that shows these cables going across the United States. These underground cables or wires are actually built alongside many major highways and railroads and maybe elsewhere. delivering ground-based telecommunications for the internet and phones. Here is a map of the system in Europe. Then this one in South America, which shows the underwater submarine cables connecting to the underground cables. Some of these are simply just put low under the ground, into the soil itself, while others might go through utility tunnels or even other tunnels which do or do not serve other purposes. They claim there are thousands of satellites up in the sky, but people do not see them on Earth or from fake pictures from outer space claim to be real. Well, they might sometimes see lights in the sky, but they don't see this many. Some might say this isn't proof they're fake because these pictures and people on Earth are far away, so they're harder to see, but even pictures from stuff like, or videos from like what they say is the International Space Station or other stuff do not show satellites in the background, if they are supposedly closer to there. Also, they say satellites are only like around the size of a car or smaller, but people aren't able to see cars from very far distances down on the Earth, so it doesn't make sense how people see them in space. The lights that are in the sky that are claimed to be satellites, some of those might be lights on balloons, or they could be celestial objects moving in the sky made out of light. Who knows, but I don't think they are what people think they are. It does not make sense how people could see them from Earth if they are really the size they claim they are. When you search terms like satellites in space on Google Images or some other browser, maybe a more trusted browser, whichever browser you use, it doesn't seem like you get very many pictures that seem to be realistic. These all look like CGI or sometimes cartoons or something, making me think they do not have any real pictures of these. And if they are claimed to be real, I think they are fake. Well, I guess that wraps this up for this video for now. Have a good one.